Good afternoon and welcome to our third video for Hatchet by Gary Paulson. Today we're going to be starting chapter 2 and some vocabulary from chapter 2 on pages 13 to 18. Okay, so we're going to follow along with our read-along vocabulary. You can read along with me at home or just listen in. Let's get started. For a time that he could not understand, Brian could do nothing. Even after his mind began working and he could see what happened, he could do nothing. It was as if his hands and arms were lead. Then he looked for ways for it to not to have happened. Be asleep, his mind screamed at the pilot. Just be asleep and your eyes will open now, and your hands will take the controls, and your feet will move to the pedals. But it did not happen. The pilot did not move, except that his head rolled on a neck impossibly loose as the plane hit a small bit of turbulence. Turbulence. Mangiru. Turbulence is when you are flying like this, and violent or unsteady movement of air or water or some other fluid causes the plane to go up and down very quickly. Okay? Turbulence. This can also happen on a boat, but in this case the airplane is shaking violently up or down from the wind. The plane. Somehow the plane was still flying. Seconds had passed, nearly a minute, and the plane flew on as if nothing had happened, and he had to do something, but did not know what. Help. He had to help. He stretched one hand toward the pilot, saw that his fingers were trembling, and touched the pilot on the chest. He did not know what to do. He knew there were procedures that you could do mouth to mouth on victims of heart attacks and push their chest, CPR, but he did not know how to do it, and in any case could not do it with the pilot, who was sitting up in the seat and still strapped in with his seatbelt. So he touched the pilot with the tips of his fingers, touched him on the chest, and could feel nothing. No heartbeat. No rise and fall of breathing, which meant that the pilot was almost certainly dead. Please, Brian said, but did not know what or who to ask. Please. Okay. Mouth to mouth, CPR, 심초소 성mitsu. So this is first aid for loss of breath or for someone whose heart and or lungs have stopped. Okay. So CPR, or mouth to mouth resuscitation. This is first aid normally taught for people who have stopped breathing or have had a heart attack or some other thing has stopped their heart or their lungs. CPR, classically it looks like this with the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so CPR. Okay, and trembling. Brian said his hands were trembling, shaking uncontrollably, trembling, shaking or quivering, typically from anxiety. Trembling. Okay, let's continue. The plane lurched again, hit with more turbulence. And Brian felt the nose drop. It did not dive, but the nose went down slightly, and the down angle increased the speed. And he knew that at this angle, this slight angle down, he would ultimately fly into the trees. He could see them ahead on the horizon, where before he could see only sky. He had to fly it somehow. He had to fly the plane. He had to help himself. The pilot was gone, beyond anything he could do. He had to try and fly the plane. He turned back in the seat, facing the front, and put his hands, still trembling, on the control wheel, his feet gently on the rudder pedals. You pulled back on the stick to raise the plane. He knew that from reading. You always pulled back on the wheel. He gave it a tug and it slid back toward him, too easily. The plane, which had increased speed from the tilt down, swooped eagerly up and drove Brian's stomach down. He pushed the wheel back in, went too far this time, and the plane's nose went below the horizon, and the engine speed increased with a shallow dive. Too much. He pulled back again, more gently this time, and the nose floated up again. Too far, but not as violently as before. Then down a bit too much, and up again as before. Then down a bit too much, and up again very easily. And the front of the engine cowling settled. When he had it aimed at the horizon, and it seemed to be steady, he held the wheel where it was. Let out his breath, which he had been holding all this time, and tried what to do next. It was a clear blue sky day with fluffy bits of clouds here and there, and he looked out the window for a moment, hoping to see something, a town or village, but there was nothing. Just the green of the trees, endless green and lakes, scattered more and more thickly as the plane flew. Where? He was flying, but did not know where, had no idea where he was going. He looked at the dashboard of the plane, studied the dials, and hoped to get some help, hoped to find a compass. But it was also confusing, a jumble of numbers and lights. One light displayed in the top center of the dashboard said the number 342. Another next to it said 22. Down beneath that were dials with lines that seemed to indicate what the winds were doing, tipping or moving, and one with a needle pointing to the number 70, which he thought, only thought, might be the altimeter, the device that told him his height above the ground, or above sea level. Somewhere he had read something about altimeters, but he couldn't remember what or where, anything about them. Okay, so let's look at some vocab here. Brian is confused looking at the dashboard. So this is a car dashboard, but dashboard is a panel facing the driver of a vehicle or the pilot of an aircraft, containing instruments and controls. Cars have dashboards, boats have dashboards, airplanes have dashboards. But there are many, many things that can be confusing. Okay? He's also looking for a compass. Compass, nachimban, an instrument containing a magnetized pointer which points north. Okay, compass points north using magnets. Okay? And the only thing he recognizes is the altimeter, which tells him height above sea level. We talked about altitude before, godo. This is godokie, a tool that tells your altitude, height above sea level. And he sees these, but he doesn't understand them. Okay, let's continue. Slightly to the left and below the altimeter, he saw a small rectangular panel with a lighted dial and two knobs. His eyes had passed over it 2 or 3 times before he saw what was written in tiny letters on the top of the panel. Transmitter 221 was stamped in the metal, and it hit him, finally, that this was the radio. The radio. Of course, he had to use the radio. When the pilot had been hit that way, he couldn't bring himself to say the pilot was dead, couldn't think it. He had been trying to use the radio. Brian looked at the pilot. The headset was still on his head, turned sideways, a bit from jamming back into the seat, and the microphone switch was clipped into his belt. Brian had to get the headset from the pilot. He had to reach over and get the headset from the pilot or he would not be able to use the radio to call for help. He had to reach over. His hands began trembling again. He did not want to touch the pilot, did not want to reach for him, but he had to get the radio. He lifted his hands from the wheel just slightly and held them, waiting to see what would happen. The plane flew on normally, smoothly. All right, he thought, now to do this thing. He turned and reached for the headset, slid it from the pilot's head, one eye on the plane, waiting for it to dive. The headset came easily, but the microphone switch at the pilot's belt was jammed in, and he had to pull to get it loose. When he pulled, his elbow bumped the wheel and pushed it in, and the plane started down in a shallow dive. Brian grabbed the wheel and pulled it back too hard again, and the plane went through another series of stomach-wrenching swoops up and down before he could get it under control. When things had settled again, he pulled at the mic cord once more and at last jerked the cord free. It took him another second or two to place the headset on his own head and position the small microphone tube in front of his mouth. He had seen the pilot use it, had seen him depress the switch at his belt. So Brian pushed the switch in and blew into the mic. He heard the sound of his breath in the headset. Hello? Is there anybody listening on this? Hello? He repeated it 2 or 3 times, then waited, but heard nothing except his own breathing. Panic came then. He had been afraid, had been stopped with the terror of what was happening. But now, panic came, and he began to scream into the microphone, scream over and over, "Help! Somebody help me! I'm in this plane, and I don't know. And he started crying with the screams, crying and slamming his hands against the wheel of the plane, causing it to jerk down, then back up. But again, he heard nothing but the sounds of his own sobs in the microphone, his own screams mocking him, coming back into his ears. The microphone. Awareness cut into him. He had used a CB radio in his uncle's pickup once. You had to turn the mic switch off to hear anybody else. He reached to his belt and released the switch. Okay. CB radio. CB stands for Citizens Band. Citizens Band Radio is a land mobile radio system, a system allowing short distance, one-to-many, bi-directional voice communication. So this means you can send your voice out to many, many, many people at once. And this is on a citizens band, which means public citizens can use it, not like police or military. Citizens Band Radio. 시민 밴드 radio. Okay? So, let's go back through our vocabulary one more time. For this, we have turbulence. Turbulence, violent or unsteady movement of air or water or some other fluid, causes airplanes to go all over the place. Mouth-to-mouth CPR, 심폐소생 생술. First aid for loss of breath or for someone whose heart or lungs have stopped. Normally it looks like this in movies when we see them go up and down, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5. Okay. Trembling, shaking or quivering, typically from anxiety. Brian is scared, so his hands keep trembling. Dashboard. The panel facing the driver of a vehicle or the pilot of an aircraft. The dashboard. Compass. An instrument containing a magnetized pointer which shows the direction of magnetic north and bearings from it. Altimeter. a tool that tells your altitude, your height above sea level. And CB radio, Citizens Band Radio, Shimin Band Radio, a land mobile radio system, a system allowing short distance one-to-many bi-directional voice communication. Okay, so let's look at Robert's recap from our book, pages 13 to 18 on chapter 2. Okay, Brian realizes that the pilot died from the heart attack, and he is really scared. Brian gets really nervous because he doesn't know how he is going to land the plane without the pilot's help. He's confused, he's scared, he's stopped. He doesn't know what to do. Brian thinks about doing CPR or mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, then realizes he doesn't know how to do it. So even if he could help, he doesn't know how to do it. So the pilot is most definitely dead because Brian can't do anything. Brian looks around at the controls and sees a radio that pilots use to call people when they're flying an airplane. He finds the CB radio controller. So he tries to use it. Okay? No one answers Brian's call, so he starts to panic, scream, and cry. There's no answer, so he is very scared, and he starts to panic, scream, and cry. Alright, so we will see you next time. That's all today for Hatchet, and I'll see you on the next video. Bye.